What is fun? Let me spell it for you.
Hi everyone, it's Miss Sullivan here again, and I'm about to talk to you a little bit about lobsters before you continue on with your slideshow. And I just kind of want to give you some information about a lobster that I have sitting right in front of me.
What is fun?
It's kind of creeping me out.
Let me spell it for you. F is for friends who do stuff together. U is for you and me. N is for anywhere and anytime at all.
Down here in the deep blue sea.
Meet Bob. Okay, so I went and grabbed a lobster at the store, just at the grocery store, so we could kind of examine it and understand a little bit more about lobsters. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what they are as animals, what kinds of animals they are, and then I'm going to explain to you all their body parts if I'm not too scared to hold him. All right, so we're looking at Bob right here, and I'm getting really close to him right there. Look at his eyes. It's really cool. Some of you might be grossed out by a lobster, but lobsters are really, really unique creatures. So lobsters belong to the invertebrate family. It means that they don't have a vertebral column, just like humans have a vertebrae, like down our spinal column, or backbone, what we're used to calling it. Lobsters don't have that. So they're part of the vertebrae category. They also are very closely related to insects. And that's not something that I knew. I actually didn't know that they were related to insects whatsoever, but they are related to insects like grasshoppers and things like that. The reason why, there's two main reasons why, is because they share characteristics of having an exoskeleton. So this shell right here, this exoskeleton that protects, that outer skeleton protects their body. And they all have joint appendages. So when you look at a lobster's claw, thank God there's elastics on there, you can see that all of them have joints. It's where they bend them and where they move them. So this lobster, Bob, right here, is on some wet newspaper, and the reason being is I looked up the safest way to care for a lobster when it's out of water, and it was to put some sort of moisture barrier underneath them because they do have gills, and to keep them moist is very important. All right, also, the last thing I want to just tell you about this lobster is that it has 10 legs. So lobsters belong to the decapod family, and deca obviously is a math word that you would be able to relate to, deca meaning 10. All right, so let's take a closer look at Bob. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how our lobster friend Bob here is bilateral. So that means that if I were to take something and draw a line all the way down the middle of this lobster, that it would have a mirror image on either side. It's being like symmetrical. It's kind of having two equal halves, very similar to how we are as humans, how we have a left side and a right side. So that's another important characteristic of lobsters. A lobster is broken into different sections, just like kind of how we have a torso and then we have legs, we have an upper body and a lower body. They also are broken into certain segments, and it's called a cephalothorax. So up here is, from here to here is considered their head portion, and you can obviously see that because that's where his eyes are. So from here to here would be considered the head portion, and then from here to here would be considered the thorax portion. So the whole thing is called a cephalothorax. Then from here to here on a lobster is considered its abdomen, and a lot of people just call it its tail, but it technically is its entire abdomen. And then down here, where they fan out right here, this is really considered its tail. So I'll give you guys a closer view of that. So there's the first segment, second segment, and his tail. Okay, so as we look at this body and we talk about its hard exoskeleton, it's called a carapace. So this whole entire shell that it has on its body right now, these lobsters do end up molting, believe it or not. They molt out of their shells, and I do have a cool video on the slide that you can look at. But this is called the carapace, this hard shell that we have here. And as we get a little bit closer, we're gonna look at the lobster's eyes. So when I look at his eyes, I kind of think they're just tiny little beads, and there's nothing else really kind of to them. But in fact, lobsters' eyes are made up of 1,000 little lenses all joined together. So they're called compound eyes. So that might be something else that they have related to some insects. With all of these lenses, you would think that maybe lobsters could see better than other animals, but in fact, lobsters don't have good vision at all. And in bright light, lobsters are pretty much blind. If you get really close to the front of the lobster, you're gonna see these things that look like giant antennae. See that antennae right there? They have these other things right here called antennules, these little tiny things right here. And they have all these tiny hairs on them. I don't know if you can see it, but if you can see all those little dots, you can see all of those little tiny hairs. In every single one of those, they contain something called a chemosensory organ. It's called the chemosensory organ overall. And they have these chemoreceptors that are found in these short little antennae. They can detect distance and odor and chemicals, signals that are carried off in the seawater. So they can detect all sorts of things that are in the ocean that would either tell them that there's food near or that there's danger near or something's about to happen. So I'm gonna zoom in on them so you can see them. I kind of have to hold him in an awkward position in order for you to understand where his mouth is. It's underneath there. He's kind of closing it up, so I don't really know that I can get to, there it is. So there's his mouth right there with those little two, like pinkish, right there is where his mouth is. So you can see that's where they would pull food in with all of these little claws that they have in order for them to eat. Can you see it right there? There it is. And those little receptors are going crazy trying to figure out what's going on. So I'm gonna carefully put him back down and then we're gonna talk about the rest of his body. So like I said before, it's a decapod, so it has 10 legs that technically it walks on or uses. So I'm gonna count them off for you. Here's one right here. There's two under here. 3, 4, 5, and then like I said, they're bilateral, so you have the same 5 on this side. You're gonna notice on this lobster that the front ones are obviously their big claws right there, and we're gonna talk about those in a second. But then the next legs, the next set of legs have these little pinchers on them. See those pinchers? They're considered pinchers and scissors. They have them on the first 3. So I'm gonna pull this one out so you can see it. See this little guy right here? Look at. So it's also a pincher or cutter. So you have that on the first 3 legs on both sides. And then the last 2 legs are different. They have a different approach. They have like this little picker that helps them kind of dig in and walk. So that has to do with their legs. And then moving on to their claws, they have these 2 massive claws right here. So see this claw right here? This claw is the larger of the 2 claws, so it's called the crusher claw. This is the one that they use to crush anything that they're trying to eat or any of their prey. And then this is the pincher claw right here. This guy right here pinches and cuts things out and pulls things out of it to kind of get all of the meat of like a mussel or a clam out. So the way you can tell whether or not a lobster is a lefty or righty is whatever side of the lobster that the crusher claw is on. So this is its crusher claw. So this little guy, Bob over here, is a lefty, which makes me happy because I am also a lefty. So that's a little bit about their claws. Take a little bit of a closer look at its abdomen. So we talked about this being the head, this being the thorax, and then this is the section that's considered its abdomen, which most people call the tail. You'll notice that none of this, the carapace here, is fused together and that they move. So as I'm moving them, you're gonna notice that this lobster has the ability to kind of tuck its tail like right up underneath itself so it can pull itself under. And the reason that is that they can move themselves like that, and it's a really cool feeling. It's kind of just like a ripply feeling. The reason why that's so good for them is that they can pull their tails under them, especially when there's danger and they need to quickly get away. That tail will contract and forcefully kind of move this lobster backwards. It'll keep pulling it back and back and back while it does it. As when we flip the lobster over, we'll talk about what's on the underside of him. So, and then I'm gonna give you a little close-up look of his tail, which is really cool. They're really incredible. Hello, Bob. Before I turn him over, I want to talk a little bit about some of his body systems. So lobsters are known, they have digestive systems, excretory systems, respiratory systems, circulatory systems, reproductive systems, all things that you're pretty much used to hearing, especially after doing the human body systems with your science classes. And all of these are pretty much located within this area right in here. All of their systems are within here. And you probably pretty much know that because typically when people are eating lobsters, they take the tail and there's usually muscle in the tail. So within here is where you would find all of their systems that are working. It's kind of interesting to know that lobsters have 3 stomachs. They have a foregut, a midgut, and a hindgut. And it's kind of like a process. Their food enters their foregut and there's tiny little like sets of grinding teeth inside that stomach that crush things up. And then from that foregut, it goes to the midgut. And in there, it's more like our stomach. Where we have bile, they have like another type of gland that produces an acid that helps break down some of the stuff in there. I don't know if any of you have ever eaten lobster, but that green stuff that you see inside the lobster, that's kind of their stomach bile that ends up breaking down the other process. And then things that are too large to get digested end up in the hindgut and then end up being released by the lobster. So it's kind of cool to understand that. Likewise, their respiratory system is made up of a bunch of gills. And when we flip them over, we'll look for that area. But what happens is all the water when they're in the ocean, I guess, supposedly comes up through underneath these little areas under their legs and in between the carapace and their legs and travels in one direction for only so many motions, and then it reverses to try to get all the particles that it's then kind of sucked in. They want to make sure that they can push it back out to clean out the system, which is a really cool thing that lobsters do. Likewise, they also, their circulatory system, they have a regular circulatory system just like us. But what lobsters do have is a single chamber kind of heart like ours. We have a 4-chamber heart. They only have a single chamber heart. And it consists of a muscle, only one muscle, and several openings, and they're called ostia. So a lobster circulatory system is known as an open system, where our system is known as a closed system. Our blood goes out and then travels right back in. So it's kind of a closed circle system. Theirs is known as an open system, which is kind of cool to understand. So this could get tricky because I'm going to hold them up and video at the same time. So one last time, we're going to go over this. This is a crusher claw. This is his pincher claw right here. So the larger claw is the crusher claw. The smaller of the 2 claws is a pincher claw. Then we have the walking legs here, right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the other one's kind of tucked under there, right there. Okay, we have his antennae, or antennule, these guys right here, which are cool. We have his eyes, those compound lensed eyes that we talked about. And then we have his cephalothorax, kind of like a tongue twister, his head portion, and then his thorax. And then down here is what's considered the abdomen, and then way in the back we have his tail. All right, so now I'm gonna flip him over and we're gonna talk about the underside. So here he comes. Ah, okay, not gonna lie, it's a little freaking me out. Yikes. Okay. I might have to change my angle. Better. Here's Bob. He's chilling, upside down. He's probably not too thrilled. All right, so again, on the other side of this claw, you can see this one right here. Here's his crusher claw, there's his pincher claw. And then you start looking and you can see all of these parts of his body that you haven't seen yet. And his tail. Okay, so as I start looking at him, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about his walking legs. Oh, I don't want to get pinched. So these are his walking legs right here. And then under his tail under here, and I'm gonna see if you can get him to move them, are called his swimmerets. So see these right here? These are called swimmerets. They help them swim a little bit here and there. If this were a female lobster, what could happen is they would have eggs all under this underbelly here. They hide all of their eggs, they kind of hold on to them all in here, and then they release them all once they're ready to go into the ocean to become little lobsters. And the video that I have after this will show you all about little baby lobsters. All right, Bob's had about enough of me for the day. Say bye, Bob. I wanted to give you one last look to see if you would move his little swimmerets there. So remember, all these little feet right here are called swimmerets, and they help them move. Let's see if I can get, there you go. Ooh, God. Where's he at? Let's see
Well, I
about
like
him.
it. Let's do it
Bye,
again.
Bob.
Okay.
See you later.
F is for frolic through all the flowers. U is for ukulele. N is for nose picking, sharing, gum and sun licking here with my best buddy.